start the recording. And welcome to Growing Your Writing Resume. We are so thrilled to have you guys here. Just a little housekeeping before we start. As you think of questions, you are welcome to drop them into the chat function. If you have a question, please precede it with a few question marks. Catherine usually demonstrates that for us before you start to type your question. That way it will pop out amongst all of the other chatter that's going on. We are recording this and we will share the recording with you afterwards. And in addition to that, we will also be capturing things in the chat. So if our wonderfully seasoned folks are sharing any kind of resources or books or links or anything like that, or websites, we will put those links and resources in the chat function, and we will download that and share that with you as well. So don't feel like you have to furiously write things down as they're sharing, because Catherine does have a superpower where she does it very quickly, and before you even think about it, it just magically appears. So we'll be sharing those things with you. So just sit back and relax and enjoy the discussion this evening. And we will break at 7:15. So you can look forward to that at that time. And we'll ask folks to share their writing successes as well at that time, because we want to encourage folks and let everyone know what's going on in their writing worlds. But without further ado, I want to welcome you guys here, and I'm going to turn things over to Phil for introductions. Thank you, Phil, for being our wonderful moderator this evening, and just take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bryn. And I'd like to start by thanking James River Writers for asking me to moderate tonight. I always enjoy talking with folks and doing these panels, so I appreciate the opportunity to do so again. I'd like to take a moment to introduce tonight's speakers, starting with Audrey Burges. She writes novels, humor, short fiction, and essays in Richmond, Virginia. Her first novel, The Minuscule Mansion of Myra Malone, was released in this year, 2023. Her second book, A House Like an Accordion, will be published by Berkeley in May of next year, 2024. Audrey is a frequent contributor of humor to McSweeney's, The New Yorker, and other humor outlets, and her stories and essays have appeared in several literary magazines. Athena Dixon is the author of the essay collections, The Loneliness Files and The Incredible Shrinking Woman, as well as poetry chapbook, No God in This Room. Her work also appears in the Breakbeat Poets Volume 2, Black Girl Magic, and Getting to the Truth, the Practice and Craft of Creative Nonfiction. And lastly, we have Sushma Subramanian, is the author of How to Feel, The Science and Meaning of Touch. She is a science and health journalist whose writing has appeared in Slate, The Atlantic, Elle, Scientific American, Discover, and many others. She teaches journalism as an associate professor at the University of Mary Washington and advises the student newspaper, The Weekly Ringer. Thank you all for being here tonight and spending some time with us. We're just going to dive in. We're talking tonight about building writers' resumes. And we're going to touch a little bit on paid stuff, but also talk about how to build your image and reputation in your career. And let's just kind of jump in and talk about what it means to be a writer in the current moment. Oftentimes when people say they want to be a writer, we're almost always picturing a career where the effort is predominantly focused on writing novels or books or poems or whatever your preferred medium may be. How does that line up with reality, and what does it mean to be a writer today? Let's throw this over to Sushma to start.
Sure. Well, I think as a journalist, a lot of people end up being journalists because they want to be creative writers, but then like want some job security, right? So that was kind of my backstory for being a journalist. And the main thing that you are producing as a journalist is usually not books, it's articles. And the reality is just that after several years working in daily journalism, of course, daily journalism is struggling. And also I wanted to move on to doing like long form magazine work, right? And so I think that just the natural thing, I think for a lot of journalists who have been doing it for a while, who are not feeling like they're getting what they want out of their like full-time journalism job, they end up doing freelancing. So so the book was great for me, but really like the main thing you're producing as a journalist is articles.
And in your current writing, you are doing even much more than that, right? Because you're also a college professor.
Yes.
So you have a lot of hands in a lot of pots.
Yeah. Although they all have worked together in this weird way that, it just happened, where I just started adjuncting, and I was lucky enough to turn that into a full-time position. And what that allowed me to do is to write less just for money, right? I didn't have to do like, the short women's magazine articles, that I had to do just to pay rent, instead I could really focus on like articles that could take me 2 years to do, where there was not going to be any money that I was going to see for a long time, right? And it was because I had this full-time job teaching journalism that I was able to cultivate more of that work to build up my reputation.
I want to jump to the other two panelists in just a moment, but I have one more follow-up on that because of something else that you said there, where you are spending more time as a professor teaching that sort of thing, and you're spending less time writing. Even though it's for money, you're spending less time writing. How does that affect you as a writer if you're turning from spending most of your energy on writing to something else, and writing becomes the other thing?
Yeah, that's a good point. So writing is the main thing that I do during my summer. So I still feel like I have, like right now, that's my main thing that I'm doing. But yeah, I think that even when you're doing like full-time writing, a lot of what you're doing is not writing, right? As a journalist, you're like I think most of what I did was just generating ideas, like having to have ideas left and right to fill pages, to fill word count, and I think that now that I have to do less of that, there's less, kind of pressure to do that. I can be more thoughtful about what I do write. So I've never seen it as like the second thing that I do. It's kind of like both of them feed each other.
Sure. Athena, I'm going to jump over to you and ask you, how much of Sushma just mentioned that even when she was a full-time journalist, actively putting words on a page wasn't the thing that she was doing the most of. Is that the same case with you, with your writing?
It is. I'm a little bit of the flip side of this. So I started off as an adjunct, and I was going between 3 schools and teaching, and I was very, very, very poor. And I could not sustain that. I wanted to do it. I wanted to hold on long enough so I could make writing and editing and teaching my full-time job. But realistically for me at the time, it wasn't possible. So I've spent the last almost 15 years being a full-time federal employee. So I have a very stable, nicely paying job, which I can count on. So it allows me to write the things that I want to write. It allows me to submit a lot slower, because I'm not writing for money necessarily. It's good if I get paid for it, but I'm not writing to pay my bills. So it gives me the opportunity to pick and choose where I want to submit. It lets me pick and choose the editorial clients that I take on. And as every year has been going by since about 2017, roughly, I've been making more and more money writing and transitioning more into writing and editing full time. But I spend the vast majority of my day in a cubicle working for the government. And so all of my writing is concentrated in the evenings, the weekends, and I hoard all of my annual personal leave so I can take a writing retreat every summer. So it is my passion, but it's not the thing that I spent the bulk of my time doing, because I can't, because realistically I have to have a day job until I reach the tipping point that I've determined for myself that it's okay for me to leave the safety of that day job. And I'm almost there, but not there quite yet.
Good luck. But I think that is the majority of the story for writers. Most of us have some thing that helps support the writing. Audrey, do you mind talking about what it looks like to be a writer in your world?
If you see me continuing to look over here, I managed to get rid of my children for the evening, but not our brand new rescue dog. So I'm just looking over as he's destroying various things in the room that we're in. So I really fit my writing in kind of the breadths and spaces between other things. I was one of those. I also have a full-time job. I actually I was also the kind of person that always intended to be a writer, and thought I'll do something else for a while first. And the thing that I picked for a while first was being a lawyer, which tended to, it did two things. One, it made time go by really quickly. And also because I was writing all the time, it didn't really dawn on me for about 20 years that I hadn't done anything creatively for a really long time. I did a lot of other hobbies. I did knitting, I did, and then I had kids on top of everything else. And so, but I wasn't actually writing. And I kind of had a moment where that jolted me in 2018. There was a content call on NPR for stories about Mama Stanberg's cranberry relish. I don't know if anybody else makes this like hot pink. It's all right. You've got to take the journey with me. Cranberries, onions, horseradish, sour cream, sugar. I know it sounds right. So it's a divisive relish, but it's one that my mom and I have made for pretty much my whole childhood. And so when they had this story, I was like, oh, I'm driving on the road. I was on the road a lot for work, and I thought, oh, I could write a story about that. So I did. And the next day, actually, NPR called me and said, hey, we'd really like to record you reading this for the air. And I'm like, this is, So I told literally every person I had ever met in my life. I told every person I ever ran into in the grocery store. And for about 24 hours was walking on air. And then about 24 hours after that, they told me they were going to go in a different direction after I'd already told everybody I knew. And so I, felt awful and was horribly, there it is, horribly embarrassed and everything like that. But then when I started thinking more about it, I thought, oh, well, wait a second. This is the first thing I've written creatively in a couple of decades now. And someone actually thought it was good. So maybe instead of continuing to say, I'm going to do this, I'll see if I can figure this out for real. And since it was October, National Novel Writing Month was coming up, and I thought I'll try that. I'll treat it like a math quiz. If I can get 1,500 words a day after my kids go to bed, maybe I can actually come up with a novel. And I did, but that novel didn't go anywhere. It was great practice. But it was something that kind of showed me, at least from a mathematical standpoint and a theoretical standpoint, you can do this. You can do this in this time you don't think you have. You can do this, when you're waiting in line at the grocery store in your notes app. You can do this when you're on the road and you're texting yourself an idea. I think what Sushma said about not, making sure you're keeping track of those ideas and constantly generating ideas. One thing I learned very early is if I wake up with something at 3 a.m, I immediately type it into the notes app on my phone. I never let an idea go because I've had too many where I'm like, oh, that's so great. I'm never going to forget that. That's going to be brilliant. And then I wake up the next morning, I'm like, I bet it was, but it's gone now. So for me, the biggest thing is once I actually have a chunk of time, I can actually generate words really, really quickly. That's the lawyer in me. I had to learn to do that. I had to, when you've got a 50-page brief due by midnight, and it's got to convince a reader, right? It's got to convince a judge to do what you want them to do. That translated a lot more easily to writing creatively than I think I even realized it would in the beginning. But it does require, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, understanding that you might not have that perfect 8-hour stretch of time. You might not have 4 hours. You might not have 5 minutes, but you have to write that thing down and come back to it when you have more time later.
That's great. I think we're all kind of talking about the ways that we're fitting our writing in around our lives. And when we're all really busy and we all have split focus. When it comes to a resume and furthering our reach or getting our name out there or finding the things that we should be known for, how do we determine what we should be chasing? Say, for example, we want to write poetry, but we think we need to do other types of pieces or appearances to grow our audience or that sort of thing. How do we figure out what we should even be doing? I'm just going to throw that out to anybody who wants to take it, or I'll pick someone.
Okay.
Go ahead, Athena.
I'll say first, I am a big fan of organic community building, organic creative process over checking things off of a list or creating a specific type of CV or writing resume, because whatever you do to create that writing resume, CV, or community, you are there. And you may be able to shift at some point, but you're always going to have threads of that life. It's like them telling you not to write a book that you're not willing to talk about for several years, because it's always going to be there. If you're creating a creative life and a creative community or a creative resume that you are not vested in, it's going to make your journey a lot harder. And publishing is already difficult. It's difficult to get your work picked up. It's difficult to get an agent, an editor, and there's a lot of rejection. So if you're setting yourself up from the beginning, you're going to be bound to have a lot more failure than you should have. And so I completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I think the most important aspect of that is allowing the work to be what it is. I'm a person, I've written poetry. I have a poetry chapbook. I have 2 collections of essays. I've written a couple of novels, which have not seen the light of day, but I'm a big fan of the idea that the work tells you what it needs to be. So it's not necessarily you chasing a particular thing to mark something off of a list. It's, are you giving your work the best vessel to present it in? So if there's something you're having difficulty in writing as a poem, maybe it needs to be a longer form prose poem, maybe it needs to be a novel, maybe it needs to be a short story. So using your revision process and your creative process to chase those things on the page before you chase them in the world, because once they're in the world, they're concrete and you're going to be stuck into that thing that you put it into. So that's the first thing to pursue. And then in terms of creating community around that, I think it's very important to make sure that the people that you're in community with are people that you want to be in community with when you're not promoting something, you're not trying to publish something, and vice versa. That I want people that I can actively engage with as a human being and not just a writer, because those 2 things for me are 100% intertwined. They're not 2 separate beings.
Thank you. Does anybody want to follow up on that?
Sure. So I will say that the process for writing nonfiction, I think it makes it a little bit easier to answer this question, because I'm not working on something for 3 or 4 years without any promise that it'll be anywhere, right? So there's the inbuilt process of pitching that really helps to figure out in nonfiction whether to pursue something, right? So I've like just over the years have really appreciated that pitch process where I can be interested in something, but then I have the chance to bounce it off of an editor who will tell me whether it's something that I should be doing, right? And over time, it's just, if I feel that spark of an idea, I'll just go to an editor right away and like ask them, am I crazy for thinking this is a good idea, right? And if I have that reassurance that I'm onto something, that's what helps me figure out whether it's something I should pursue. And I will say, like at the beginning, I used to pitch a lot of stuff that went nowhere, but I think that talent has developed over time at figuring out what I'm interested in that I can get other people into as well.
Yeah. Audrey, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just, I think part of it too is part of figuring out your voice and who you're going to be as a writer and who you sound like and what kind of feedback resonates with you and what doesn't sound like you. That's all a process that, at least for me, I learned by being rejected over and over and over and over and over again in a variety of different genres, just to mix things up. And I think that that really, if you're doing that by throwing things in that you're not really interested in writing, things that you're, this is a hot topic right now, I'll write about this, or people are really responding. People do this a lot in humor, particularly with timely pieces, trying to get something that's from the headlines. I've never had that skill. I need more time. And I think a lot of people will just try to do something because they think that's the market, instead of something that really speaks to them and that they enjoy and that they want to learn more about or want to try. And so I think, again, just like building a community or anything else, if it's not natural, if it doesn't come to you naturally, if it feels like you're forcing it for some end goal, that for me is a signal that you need to kind of step back and go, is this, with the limited time that I have to do this thing that brings me joy, am I using this thing to enhance that joy with this small bit of time that I have? Or am I doing this because I feel like I have to? There is no have to. And a lot of the things you think you have to do are not going to pan out the way you expect. So, so it really helps to kind of come back again to the why am I doing this? Why do I think this is something that is worth my passion to pursue?
Well, following up on that, how often do you feel like you need to, or that you want to do things outside of your writing that you feel are going to help your career, like appearances, like say something like this, where you're talking about writing? How do you determine when it's not actually writing and it's not life? How do you determine which of these opportunities to even pursue or say yes to? What's worth a yes versus a no, to help build your either audience or your resume or that sort of thing?
So I don't think I've ever built an audience doing podcasts or, events like this. I think the writing is the way to develop an audience, but writing is such a solitary endeavor that I think stuff like this is helpful to develop a feeling of community where you see that other people are going through the same stuff as you. So yeah, I guess I see it as the reverse.
Oh, interesting. Athena, how about you? You've also mentioned community, which Sushma just brought up. Do you have anything else to kind of throw on there?
I think I'm very, very similar in that respect. A lot of the times that I do things like this or podcasts or other interviews is because someone's read something that I've written and they're interested in talking to me about the process of writing it. Or I did a course yesterday about revision. And I don't think that I've ever entered into anything like this specifically to gain an audience. I usually say yes to things that make me curious. So if it's an interesting spin on a podcast and there's going to be a set of questions that I've never heard before, I'm going to be very interested in doing that particular thing. I also have a sliding scale of yes and no for things. So if my first instinct is to be like, that is not a good use of my free time that I have, I'm going to say no. I'll say it very diplomatically, but no, because if my gut reaction is this is taking more energy than I have, it's a no. If I feel that, but it's a group of people that I have a community with that I always do things for, it's almost 100% a yes, because I respect those people and I know that they respect my time and they wouldn't ask if they really didn't need me. And then there's some things that are just always going to be maybes depending on the load of it. But I'm always doing things by word of mouth, prior connections, people reading my work and being interested in it. And then I want to do that, not because I'm necessarily looking for people to then rope into my work. I want it to be the opposite.
Yeah, and that kind of word of mouth and connections, that's all growing organically out of community that you're building or other things that you're doing. How often are you, I know you have this sliding scale, but when was the last time, say, that you felt like you had to say yes to something that you really wanted to say no to, in terms of an event or an appearance or a reading? You don't have to go into specifics, but like...
Probably about 2 months ago. And I said yes against my better judgment because I'm ramping up to book release in October. And so there's a lot of stuff on my plate right now. But I said yes because that particular person that asked me, I know that they recognize the level of commitment that I currently have, and they would not have asked me, but they really did not need me to do this. And so since I know they respect my time, I said yes, and I'll fit it in.
So it's because you had a personal connection with this person and you knew that they were going to respect your time.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Audrey, would you like to add anything to this while we're on the topic?
I think having just been, I'm still in my debut year right now, and it's kind of a rolling debut year because I had the US release and I just had the UK release in July, or the beginning of this month, and then I'm going to have Germany and several other successive countries. And with each of those things, people are sending you, hey, could you do this article? Could you do this story? This podcast wants to talk to you. Could you write a guest blog post for this? And I think that in the first leading up to the release, and probably in the first month after that, I didn't know what I could say no to, right? You want to be, I'm exceptionally privileged that I got a book deal. I'm so psyched about the fact that I have this opportunity. And there's that piece that really wants to be a good author. I'll be a good author and I will do what they tell me to do because I am a good author and I am going to behave. And so I didn't really do a lot of that. Do I need to write this blog post for this blog that I've never read before? And that, so I started having to be a little more, again, thoughtful about, is this something I'm interested in? I'm a huge nerd. If you've got this weird, I talked to one podcast that was really focused on mythology, and I love mythology, and they had some things that they wanted to tie in with my book, and I thought that was great. And it was really tiny. It was not a big, huge podcast, but they just sounded like interesting people to talk to. So for me, that's again the kind of I much like Athena, I have to kind of listen to that first initial reaction, and in the beginning, I didn't trust that as much. I would just I would go where I was told to go and say, and sign up for what I was told to sign up for. And I just finally, again, realized that the time is so limited, and there's really, frankly, very little you can do as an author to move the needle other than just being out there and writing. Like Sushma says, it's the writing that gets the audience. And so, I kind of have to refocus on that from time to time. But I don't think you should do anything that makes you uncomfortable. I don't think you should do anything that makes something that should bring you joy feel like a slog.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. Sushma, I want to jump back over to you because you got into journalism, and how did you get into the focus of health and science in journalism and as your nonfiction specialty?
Yeah, well, so one thing I did not anticipate as a journalist, I started out as a local journalist covering like politics, education in a community. And I started doing it straight out of college, and just emotionally managing all these people who are angry at you all the time was hard for me, right? And that was the hardest part of the job. And I think that I wouldn't have that problem today. But I thought that, like, if I write about health and science, I could just write about interesting discoveries and people will be happy with me. It turns out that there is a lot of conflict within these fields, and I have gravitated towards very conflict heavy subjects. So I haven't, the strategy was not successful ultimately, but I did end up with this specialization that it feels like me, like it feels true to me, because I think that probably subconsciously I knew that, like, oftentimes the way that I see the world is influenced heavily by, like, what does the science say? That's always often a question of mine, right? If you look at my Google search, that's often what I'm looking for. And so it's not like I'm only covering like hardcore biology. It's more like if I see something out there that's interesting in the world, like my first question about it is often, well, what do the experts, who research this, what are they saying about it, and what are the conflicts that they're seeing within this world? And so it's just, I think, to me, become less of a, like, I cover only these particular subjects, and more of like, this is my worldview.
Sure. And when you first started moving the needle towards this like health and science away from the kind of local stuff. How did you approach that? Like it was that, since it was a conscious choice, it sounds like.
Yes, it was. And I think that probably the time that I was making this transition informed how I did it, right? So there were tons of jobs at local papers, but like the jobs in health and science were very limited. And so I couldn't just like try to look for a health and science job. People who were doing that like had been in a paper forever and just like jumped into that and they were not going to leave it, you know? So it was one of those things where I didn't find a way into it doing that full-time work. So the only way I was going to be able to do it was through freelancing. So I did a couple stories and then I created a website, which, you know, like people treated your website like it was, you know, sacrosanct back in the day. Like, oh, you know, this person is what they say. I called myself a health and science journalist after writing 2 stories or something, and people believed it.
Right. So you kind of willed it into being.
Yeah.
In that way. Ah, that's
Although
great.
I don't think it's that different today. I think that you could probably put on your, I was about to say Twitter, but your X bio that you,
sorry,
that, you know, all of a sudden you're like a celebrity journalist or, you know, you're whatever it is. And people will probably buy it.
Yeah. So as a follow-up to that though, if you say you make that claim or you are telling people that, in what way we're here talking about building resumes, right? Like, how do you start to back that up?
Right. So, I mean, that was a strategy to build a resume. So I wrote a couple stories, you know, I didn't call myself that at the time, but once I have a couple stories and under my belt, I understand how this thing works. Right. And so, so then the resume naturally builds on itself, right? Like one story leads to the next, and all of a sudden what I'm presenting myself as is no longer like a total fabrication.
Yeah, absolutely. Athena, I'm going to jump over to you. Similarly, you've written essays and poetry and nonfiction memoir. And so can you talk about what came first, and what kind of precipitated your expansion into other kinds of writing? Was it slowly interest? Was it grabbing opportunities when they arose? Can you talk about that journey?
I think I'm the sole personal essayist here, so it's a little bit more heart-based than anything else, but I started writing fiction first when I was a child, and all I did was write short stories and make up these scenarios. And then I started to write poetry, and I got a lot of encouragement in poetry. I was told I was very, very good at it, and that eventually led to me getting a master's degree in creative writing, where I concentrated in poetry. And so I spent the vast majority of my teenage to adult life considering myself a poet because it was a thing that I was good at, and I got recognition for it. I went to school for it. And then in about 2012, I started writing personal essay because I went through a very bad divorce. And that was one of the first times I realized that what I needed to say creatively, I could not say in poetry. So I started to experiment with different forms, and I found a home in creative nonfiction, and I pretty much switched all the way over. I haven't written a poem in a very long time, but part of that discovery was me starting to set up explorations in that form. So I started to apply for writing workshops and essays versus poetry. So I applied to Callaloo, and I got to go to Oxford for a week to work with other British essayists. I then went to Vona and I worked on a memoir pod where I got to work on how to put together a narrative arc for a memoir, and then eventually ended up at Tin House where I did a winter workshop with them, and eventually got a second book residency with them, and now they're publishing my book in the fall. So it was just a lot of experimentation and the personal drive to be curious about a format that could let me express myself.
Sure.
And from that curiosity then spanned all of the other things that came from it, being able to get paid to do it. It eventually led to me being able to be an editor, developmental editor and sensitivity reader for private clients. I have a whole secondary business for that. And all of that was built through a curiosity of form and not necessarily me pursuing it, but I just needed to find a way to express myself.
Okay, so I find it interesting that both Sushma and Athena have reached a point in their careers where they were doing a thing and they made a conscious choice. This isn't the way that I'm fulfilling all of what I want, right? Like, so changing from poetry to personal essay is a way to more fully express yourself, or going from local reporting to changing, very conscious choice to change to health and science. Audrey, did you find yourself going through a similar kind of process where you had to make these crucial decisions and will yourself in a direction?
You know, it's not really a, for me, it's not really a willing myself in a direction. I tend to write kind of the way I used to knit back when I used to be able to knit. You have kind of the complicated project you're working on that requires a lot of attention, and you have the thing where you can kind of turn your brain off for a while and just do what you were, you know, kind of get in a rhythm. And then you have something that's kind of in between. Different genres for me are kind of like palate cleansers. So if I hit a wall, you know, I'm working on a scene in a novel and I just can't make it work, rather than continuing to try to make it work, I will put it aside. But to keep the flow going, I have what I call as a hamster brain. It's going all the time, and so I take it off the work wheel when I get home and I put it on the writing wheel, and I kind of have to keep the writing going in order to keep the momentum going. So if I hit a wall, I'll switch to something else. I'll switch, you know, I'll write a humor piece, or I'll write a flash fiction piece, or I'll work on an essay. And my, you know, my level of availability and my level of attention drives kind of where I'm going with a particular project. But it is one of those things that I didn't start any of the things that I write. After a while, I didn't start them in any service of any other particular goal. I started there. That first book that I wound up shelving, I started, you know, writing short fiction and writing humor pieces because I had read you need to build an audience, right? So I start that's how I learned that setting doesn't work for me. That I really, if it's not something I enjoy doing, it doesn't sound like me. It doesn't come across. But then I discovered, although I have this very strange no man's land between 800 words and 80,000, I can't do long form stuff. I just have a short and I have really big. But it did kind of help me. Each of those genres kind of feed on the other. Novel writing helps me know how to form a narrative. Short fiction and humor helped me know how to be succinct and feed a reader down the page. Because when you're writing short works, you know that someone is scrolling through it on their phone, you know, in the checkout line. And that I'll often put something I'm working on a phone to scroll through it and see, are there any places where I stop, where that momentum stops, where someone, you know, loses attention. If I lose attention and I really care about this story, that whoever is going to read it is definitely not going to stay invested. So, I have found that the more I can kind of focus on just keeping moving, you know, the better off I am.
Thank you for all those answers. I want to shift kind of direction a little bit and ask, we've been talking about connections and community and things like that. Let's talk about things that connected in unexpected ways in your careers. What's like the wildest or most random thing that you can think of, something that you felt that was totally disconnected from your writing that ends up helping either your writing or your career?
I have so many examples of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that just like coming up with ideas, you know, like I think that you could sort of, as a writer, start training your brain to see ideas everywhere over time. Like I remember, this is a story that I tell my students often when they're like trying to come up with ideas for their stories for my classes. Like there was this one time in my first job as a newspaper reporter where I went to visit my parents for the weekend, and then, you know, was flying back to Orange County. And as I was like standing in line to get on my flight, I see that there's this guy who has this big trophy, huge trophy that he was taking with him on the plane, and it had two hands clasped at the very top. And like, normally I would never just talk to a stranger. I'm just don't have that type of personality. But because I'm a journalist, and this is my favorite thing about it, I get to talk to random people all the time because I have an excuse, right? And so I went up to him and asked him what that was for. And he told me that he had won an arm wrestling competition that weekend. And so I was like, I need to get your number because I want to write about you when we get off this plane. And we met, and it ended up being like a cover story for the paper. But yeah, like these weird things happen all the time. Without that strange exchange, I would never have learned all about the world of training for arm wrestling competitions. Like, it's a real thing that people do.
I'm guessing it's a very specific type of training.
Yes.
Huh. Fascinating. Would anybody else like to jump in with their either arm wrestling stories or other random things that have helped their careers or writing?
I will say I'm a fan fiction writer, and I write lots of fan fiction. And for a very long time, it was the only thing that I was writing. I wasn't writing poetry, I wasn't writing memoir, essay, I was strictly writing fan fiction. And I did it in secret because I was afraid for people to make fun of me because I was writing it. And what happened is that it taught me a lot of how to engage with an audience. It taught me how to be able to build in natural breaks and pauses. It helped me figure out where I could set up tension in a piece that would make people react. It helped me with dialogue in a lot of ways. And I never expected that. And it turned out that it made my prose a lot stronger when I came back to writing personal essay, because now I know how to emotionally engage people. And now I'm very, very open about writing it, and I post it and I'll share it with people. I don't care. But it was so unexpected because I was so terrified that people would think that I was some weird, like, miscreant because I was writing about Black Panther fan fiction. I write Black Panther fan fiction.
Nice.
And it really was a very, very supportive community. And I found some of my most favorite writers over the last couple of years writing fan fiction. People who write fan fiction, especially alternative universes or AUs, are some of the most creative people. They can create original characters and dialogue and emotional resonance that you cannot believe. And it is my goal that if I ever have the opportunity to pull somebody along, it's probably going to be one of the fan fiction writers because
Awesome.
They have mastered it.
Well, no, I think this is a great example of the things that you might do because of passion for yourself. There's no money there ultimately, but you're building community and you're building skills and you're doing all of these other things that are helping you in your career. That's fantastic. Audrey, would you like to jump in with any random things that ultimately helped you out?
Both of those examples are so great. I've arm wrestling and fan fiction. Also, you never, E.L. James, right? May started with the fan fiction that they can make it, become huge careers. I have found oddly that the times that stories fall into my lap are the times that I have promised myself and my family I'm not going to write. We're just going to go on vacation. We're just going to do this thing. And no, I'm not in writer mode. And then something it's just so perfect will fall into my lap. And I'll be like, oh, hey, I won't write this right now, but I am going to just jot this note really quickly. I took my kids to Luray Caverns a couple of years ago for spring break, and I'd never been there. And at the time I was struggling on a novel project, and I had booked this, I think through like Airbnb, this house that looked really cool, like a really old, farmhouse that looked really elegant and everything. And then we got there and the place was falling down. It was just this like ramshackle couple of buildings cobbled together, and it was really weirdly designed, and it really felt haunted. It was raining the whole time that we were there. And, in the first 5 hours, I'm like, we could just go. We could just go back and go home and say, and the kids were insistent that we stay there. And that first night I was just kind of poking around, and all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, this is the house where my protagonist grew up. She grew up here. This is the house. And it's once I realized that, it clicked into place for me. The whole story clicked into place for me in a way that I don't think it would have if I'd been actively, how am I gonna fix this story? I don't know what I'm gonna do. You know, it was like when I turned off that part of my brain that I was, I think I was more open to kind of noticing things. And I think, the arm wrestling story, it helps to notice things, and you can't do that. You can't notice those strange details or hear those weird snippets of conversations if you're beating your head against the wall on this path that you are determined to go down. Sometimes you got to take the branch and see where it leads.
And with that answer, it's a perfect place for our intermission. Bryn, how long are the intermissions again, if you don't mind hopping in?
It'll be 10 minutes.
Okay.
So it's 7:16. So we say about 7:26, 7:27. And in this time, if you guys want to go ahead and put any more questions that you have, I know that our wonderful panelists have started to answer some of the questions, but we'll probably cover them after the break as well, to make sure that we cover all of those aspects from all of you. Or perspectives from all of you. And then also please share your writing successes. That could be rejection, because that's part of the process. That could be feedback that you've gotten, a poem that has been published, or you got words on paper that you haven't gotten on paper in a year. I don't know what it is, but everybody's in a different place in their writing, and we want folks to feel like they're not alone. So whatever that milestone or thing that you've accomplished is, just share it with us, and that way we can share it with everyone and they can feel motivated and not alone. So do that during the break. So it's 7:17. Thank you for the fabulous discussion so far. We're really enjoying it, and we'll be back at 7:27. Okay, thank you guys. All right, everybody, we're gonna start back up again in just a minute. This is Bryn.
Hello again, everybody. Hope you all had a nice break.
Okay. I am going to go ahead and share the successes that were shared and then hand it over to Phil, if you're okay with that, Phil, to handle the questions. Okay. All right. So Charles Tab said, as of this month, I passed 130,000 books sold. That's all of my currently 9 books combined. The biggest seller is Floating Twigs, which along with the first 3 in the Twigs series are Kindle deals this month. Congratulations, Charles. That's great. Bill Bloom says my new book, West of Apocalypse, comes out August 8th, and I'll be doing an event for it at the Fountain Bookstore on August 16th. Congratulations, Bill. That's so exciting. Heather Cole says, hello, everyone. I'm new to JRW. My book, Virginia's Presidents, A History and Guide, was published by the History Press in January, and I've been pounding the pavement, giving talks the past 5 months, including one coming up at the Massanutten Regional Library in Harrisonburg this Thursday at 7 p.m. That's great news, Heather. Congratulations. It sounds like your hard work's paying off. Let's see. Make sure I haven't missed anyone. I think that's it for the successes. That's great news, everyone. Thank you for sharing and keep up the great work. And I'll hand it over to you, Phil, to go ahead and start with the questions.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I know that there's been some discussion in the chat about one of the questions that Heather Cole asked, but I do want to ask it on video and just kind of get the conversation going there. She asks, so you consider unpaid speaking gigs, such as book talks at the local public library, to be a waste of time. Do you think they don't build audience for your writing, especially if you're self-published or published with a small press?
I'm going to say, I don't think that they're a waste of time. I generally, the vast majority of things that I do, I'm not paid for. And if I am paid for them, they're very nominal fees. I'm not a writer who's going to you're going to pop up in my inbox and you're going to be like, what's your fee? And I'm going to tell you some crazy number, because I'd rather say no if I'm going to say something crazy. That's why I mentioned earlier, I generally only say yes to things that either I have a personal connection to, or I'm very interested in whatever you're asking me to do. So I generally don't get paid to do things. I do them because I want to do them. And I don't consider them a waste of time, because I'm not going into it trying to build an audience. Usually the people who are signing up for things that I'm involved with already know that I'm going to be there because they know me as a writer outside of that. So if extra people come to me after, that's always a bonus, but it's never my intent going in. It's just because I want to have conversations about writing and meet cool people, because they're usually cool people in these kind of events. But no, I think it's very much worth my time. It's just not a monetary thing for me.
Yeah.
I answered this in the chat too, but I've never been paid for anything. None of the stuff that I do, none of the things, none of the appearances, certainly the talks or anything like that. And for what I was saying is, I can't go into, for me, when I go to one of these events or something like this, it's not, I can't go in with the mindset, I'm doing this because I'm trying to build my audience. Because if I do that, it's like when I get told I have to go to a networking event, or remember early in law when I was in private practice, people would do these like referral events where you're supposed to go and you're supposed to, and I always felt like a used car salesman, and I can't hit that stride. I feel really unnatural. I sound really unnatural. I don't sound like myself. And I feel like I'm the same way when I go to something that I feel like I'm there as a means to an end. If I am there because I love talking to other writers. I love talking to people. I love talking to readers, even, just people who have read an interesting book and, it turns out to be something I read too. And, again, because I'm a big nerd. So if I go into it with that mindset, it doesn't matter. I'm not going there because I'm being paid. I'm not going there because I'm trying to build an audience. I'm going there because that's what I love to do. That's why I do this. I write because I like writing, and I like talking to people who like writing because they're like me. And I like talking to people who like reading because they're like me. So that's kind of what my focus is. If I lose track of that and do it because, I feel like someone told me to be there, I don't sound like me.
Sushma, would you like to add?
I don't have that much more to add, but there
Yeah.
was one time when I was offered a payment from a library. I didn't even know what number to give because it really is not that common.
I think
By
it's
a
interesting.
library. Amazing.
They had some kind of foundation with a
Oh,
a wealthy donor. Yeah.
That's great. But I also think it's interesting that once again comes back to people in your community or things that you love. It seems to be the theme over and over. Caitlin asks, Athena, hello from a fellow Govi. How do you balance your creative content with maintaining a professional image in your workplace, particularly when it's delving into personal topics?
I answered that in the chat, but I'll just kind of reiterate. I am very, very open with not only my coworkers, but also my immediate supervisor and my manager about me writing. I keep a printout of my upcoming stuff in my cubicle, so when they come by, they're going to see it. And I keep them aware of that kind of stuff because while I'm not talking about my job in any way, shape, or form, because like I said, I work for the government, I work for a large federal agency, and I don't want any remote possibility of having a Hatch Act violation or anything that's going to cost me my stable career. So I tell them in advance, hey, I have this book coming out, or I have a speaking engagement. There's actually a form that you have to fill out for outside activities. So it's been on file for like the 15 years that I've worked with the government. And so far, nothing's come up where they've felt like I was crossing a line. I honestly don't think more than a handful of people in my office have read my book. One of them asked me to sign one yesterday, and I told her, please don't read this in the office. But other than that, it's been pretty fine. I think because they're aware of it and it's not blindsiding them, that they're okay with it. But I think if I was trying to hide it, it would be a bigger issue. And I think also they respect the fact that I'm doing it in a professional way, that they're realizing that I'm not just throwing this work into the world and it's going to come back and it's going to be some kind of blowback. So far, so good.
That's great. Heather Cole asks, how do you balance building your writing career with building your other career? Have there been times when you've had to prioritize one or the other? Everybody's nodding. Sushma, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, so the writing is kind of built into my full-time job, luckily. So like there's a certain math that every academic position involves. Like for my job, like 50% of what I do is teach. That's more than at the usual, like, research heavy institution. I'm at a teaching college, right? So that's the majority of my job. And then 25% is service to the university. And then 25, and that's like being in committees and stuff like that. And then 25% is my professional work, right? So doing my writing is part of the full-time job. That being said, like sometimes the teaching can definitely like take over, especially when it's times of the year when I'm heavily grading stories and, editing students' work. But that I enjoy too, right? I consider that part of like having a community, like I said before, there are times when writing feels very lonely, very solitary, and having students who I can be excited with about writing, like including like editing their work, is it makes me better. It makes me excited about the work. So I don't really consider them to be so separate, but for sure there are times that are more writing heavy and times that are more like teaching heavy.
Yeah. Audrey, how about you?
Yeah, I frequently have to kind of make that call. I'm a government lawyer, and I supervise a team of 5, and I'm a trial attorney. So there are times that I'm just not going to be able to focus. Although strangely, when I have a really complex case or something that's really taking a lot of my attention, I often find that those are times that I'll get less sleep and stay up till 11 o'clock at night to work on something, because it's a way to kind of take my time back. Like this, I can still use my brain, but I don't have to I don't write about anything having to do with law. I don't write anything to do with work at all. And so it's a way that I can kind of pursue something that I really enjoy and not make it look like or make my brain think about anything that I'm doing professionally. So one tends to enlarge my availability for the other, if that makes sense. So yeah, but it is one of those, there are times that I've just been like, I can't work on this project right now. And that again is why I had to be a little more sensible about, no, I'm sorry, I can't do this podcast, or no, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I just can't turn this story around that quickly, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Athena, would you like to answer the question?
So I have a pretty set schedule. Generally, I work Monday through Friday, 7 to 3:30, and then I have the rest of the evening to myself. So I tend to time block. I suffer from ADHD. So on top of having very finite time to write, I have distractions all the time in my head. So I time block pretty much everything. So I'll say, I know that I have from 6 p.m. to 11 to do my entire living for the day. So I'm going to take an hour and I'm going to write, I'm going to edit, I'm going to input, because I have learned to give myself grace. For me, writing is not always writing. Sometimes it's me inputting stuff or researching or writing or reading or listening or creating a playlist or a mood board. So when I do have time to come to the page fully, I have something to draw from. I also make sure, again, harping back to community, I have a writing group that I belong to, and we do sprints anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, depending on how many people are interested. We get on Zoom, cameras off. First hour, we say, this is what I'm going to work on. We go off, we work, we come back an hour in, people drop off, people come back on, and that's a way that I can be held accountable. During the first wave of lockdowns in 2020, the novel that I mentioned, I wrote all during sprints on Zoom with my writing group. Wow. Because it was a way for me to focus. I also utilize my weekends. I spend the vast majority of Saturday doing something writing related, because that's the most open time that I have where I'm not preparing for work or being finished with work. And I also am a person who hoards all of my personal time. I keep all of it, so I can take a month off, 3 weeks off, however long I can take off to do something writing related. But it really is learning how to block out the time that I do have, so I don't feel guilty about not writing, but then also giving myself the grace to understand that some days I may just not write. It may just be, I'm going to be on YouTube watching mystery videos because I'm writing about mystery stuff. So it's a lot of time blocking.
Fabulous. Thanks for the answers. Angie asks, when you are querying an agent, should your bio only include writing credits germane to your genre? For example, I'm writing a novel that is a thriller. I publish short mysteries and haiku. She admits that it's random, I know, she says. Does it help or hurt to include the poetry in my query letter bio?
It helps. It helps. I again, speaking as the person who writes in a lot of different genres, I had all of my humor writing credits in my query. Now, I will tell you that one of the reasons I wound up shelving that first book was it was a kind of a dark, twisty mystery thriller. And the platform that I had started building as a writer was as a humor, so I had this disconnect for some agents, and they would actually respond being like, I really like this book, but you've got this situation with this, orphans and deadly forest fire and heroin epidemic. And by the way, she writes all these cute, funny parenting things, and it's kind of a disconnect. So there is, I think it helps in a query to connect. I think when I think haiku, I think succinctness, right? Or being able to get across a complex, resonant message in a very short form. So think about ways that you can tie what you do. Humor is in all of my books. I wind up incorporating that into everything that I write. So when I was querying, I mentioned that it was, there was a thread of humor through what I was writing. So just be mindful, instead of just, you don't want to make it look like you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and I write this and I write this and I write that and you can find me here. It always helps to think of it in service to the project that you are trying to get representation for.
I guess I'll say this as a person who does not have an agent, who is currently in the midst of trying to get one. And I'm 2 books in and a chapbook in, and I still don't have an agent. I include my poetry in that because specifically, and this is very much tied to what she was just saying, is because I'm writing short form. I'm writing personal essay made into an essay collection or a memoir and essay. So it works for me to tell them I have the ability to write short form. And so I include my poetry chapbook because now I don't have to prove to you that I need to write something longer. I can get everything I need to say in this small piece. But I also included it because for me as a person who is now multi-books in without an agent, I'm trying to show them I have a track record of being able to get a book sold without an agent. And so that's giving them confidence to want to sign me, because now when they sign me, they know that they are guaranteed to sell a book because I've been able to do it without having an agent. And I also include individual pieces, depending on where they've been published, because it shows the ability to have a larger audience that they can then sell to. So pieces that were in like Narratively or Gay Magazine, I have an excerpt coming out in the big place that I can't say yet. That's all going into my next agent query because I need them to know that I have an audience, even though I don't have representation. So if it fits, add it.
I will say, I think I took a different approach in finding my agent because I don't know where my writing career is going to take me, right? I right now know that I write nonfiction. I don't know that in the future, I might be interested in writing fiction, but I don't think that because I've never really done that much fiction before. I mean, I've written little things here and there. I wouldn't include them in my query for a nonfiction focused project because they feel somewhat unrelated to me and are not yet part of the big picture of who I am. But I would, in that case, if I wanted to keep the option open of having someone who would maybe want to represent fiction down the line, I think that would be even though I would have my bio be focused on my nonfiction writing work, I would still want to look for agents who are open to other genres. So that I think is a way I would manage that.
Nikki asks, now that you're self-published, Athena, what's made you decide to look for an agent?
I'm actually not self-published. My chapbook was with a micro press that doesn't exist anymore. And then The Incredible Shrinking Woman was a smaller indie split lit press. And then the current collection coming out is with Tin House. I'm seeking an agent because I know after I've had a very creative conversation with myself about what I expect from my writing career and what I don't want from my writing career. And I know that I never really want to pitch to a big 5 because I don't want to get lost in the shuffle of it. So I'm comfortable at an indie level or a university press level. And so for me, I know that I don't sell myself completely enough, that I'm a little bit too humble sometimes, and I don't know how to properly market myself to a university press. And so I need an agent to be able to do that for me. And even now with this current book, I have some people interested in foreign rights. So now I'm going to have to negotiate that myself or hire an attorney. And I don't want to do that, but I'm going to have to make sure I'm safe. So it's just a matter of what makes sense. Do I want to spend the bulk of my writing time negotiating and trying to find opportunities, or do I want somebody to do that for me? I also have plans to write things outside of creative nonfiction. And so now I need an agent to be able to sell a proposal in a different way, because a nonfiction book proposal for essay collection is completely different than a fiction proposal. So I want somebody to be able to go to bat with me. It's just lots of rejection while I'm trying to find one, unfortunately.
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up on that? because you said that you're defining your career and you're deciding you don't want to go to one of the big five. With all the things we've talked about tonight, and the multiple careers and all the different things that you all do, how do you define success personally? And how does that impact the way that you're approaching this stuff?
So for me, myself, and a really good friend of mine who's a fiction writer, we had a phone call one day and we sat down and we said, what do you want your writing life to look like? And for me, it was, I want to be able to write and edit full time and be able to be comfortable. I want to be known, but I do not want to be famous. I want people to be able to recognize my work, and I want them to be excited about new work that I put out, but I do not want to be a talking head. I do not want to be on CNN. I do not care about that kind of stuff because I'm not built for it. And I want to be able to leave some kind of literary legacy, that I want to be able to see a progression in my work. And if I can hit those three things, that's success for me. And for me, that won't come from like a big five, because I don't want to get lost in the shuffle and get the scraps of a marketing budget, or I don't want to get like the scrap covers because the big name author is getting all of the light. So for me to be comfortable financially, for me to be comfortable creatively, I would like to be at this level. And as long as I can hit those metrics, then I'm good.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for that answer. Audrey, how do you define success at this point? And how does that impact the way that you're approaching what you say yes to or your career?
So I've been trying to kind of reset my mindset to be focused more on happiness than success. One of the things that I really struggle with, I think a lot of writers struggle with, is I remember the first time I got a piece into McSweeney's, and I've been trying for over a year. And I got the piece, and it was almost instantaneous. I would say maybe I had 3 or 5 minutes of just absolute joy. And then I was like, all right, now it's the New Yorker. And it's like, and there's always that next thing that you've told yourself you're going to feel like this is going to be the point at which I feel like I've made it. And I've been exceptionally fortunate to reach several of those rings that I gave myself at the beginning. And I would love to tell you that I've grabbed one of them and said, and this is the ring, and it hasn't happened yet. And so I would also love to tell you that that sense of discouragement, or what am I doing this for? Or that goes away, and it doesn't. I don't think it even goes for the people that wind up being, New York Times bestsellers. I'm not one. In my head, I always had that as one of those rings too, but I have had enough experiences now to know that there is no point, I think, that I'm ever going to consider what I am doing to be a success, because I finally realized the wrong focus for me. This isn't my day job. I originally thought, I would never want to leave my day job. There are times that I still think maybe it would be nice to be a full-time writer, but I don't, I can't have that focus. So the focus that I've been trying to have is this still making me happy? Am I still connecting with this on an emotional level that it enlarges my experience in the world around me and doesn't make me feel diminished or harried or small or unhappy? And so far the answer to that question has been yes. I've been extremely lucky. I have had people who have had that experience where someone has encountered my book in the wild and they're like, oh my gosh, you're this, that, oh, which is another thing. I'm like, I'm gonna get my writing recognized. There is no point. I don't think any of us are driven enough to be writers in the first place, to have the kind of personality after all of this rejection and all of this stuff you have to go through every single day to write. I don't think any of us have the setting that we're like, and now we're okay. We're always kind of reaching for that next thing. So I don't know if that refocusing helps anybody else, but I have to strive to do that for myself, just to give myself that mental space and peace.
Thank you for that answer. Sushma, would you like to add your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what you said, Audrey. Like, I remember when I got my book deal, I thought like that was going to make me really happy. But actually, it just made me feel so insecure, about writing the book. Am I good enough for this? What makes me feel like this is like I can actually achieve this? And actually it sunk the writing. It wasn't until I was really able to get over that and focus on just like the big questions that I was trying to answer, right? The work itself, that I was able to kind of turn it around for myself. And so I think that actually that experience on the first book, like I really thought I was going to get somewhere emotionally by having a first book out, and I didn't. It was really just from the process itself. And so I'm with you. I think that success is not what I'm going for necessarily. I think, having a career doing this is something I'm very proud of. And, I think anybody who gets to pursue, their creative life is very lucky and privileged to be able to do that. And so I consider that to be success, and as long as I feel fully engaged in the projects that I'm working on, like if I keep feeling like I have big questions that I'm trying to answer, then I feel pretty good about where I am professionally.
Thank you for those answers. Feel free to ask other questions in the chat. We have a few more minutes while other questions are coming through. I want to use this idea of success and something that Athena said earlier, because all three of you, you've built these amazing resumes. You've got your careers, your appearances, your publications, support from community, all these kinds of things. How do you get the word out that, it's a clunky way to ask it, but that you're worth other people's time? How do you toot your own horn? Athena, you were saying earlier that you're really bad at that, or you don't feel comfortable kind of talking yourself up, and that's one of the reasons that you're looking for an agent. But how do we become comfortable letting people know what we're capable of?
I will say this, I'm very anti-brand, which I think goes with marketing and yourself. I think that people outside of your agent or your editor, whoever's selling your work for you on the professional side, can tell when you're selling them something and you're presenting a person who's supposed to be something. And I am very, very anti that. So I get the word out about my work. I'm very active on my Instagram because it's the only social media where I feel comfortable. And so I just talk to the people who are there. And those people find a connection, because I write a lot about being voiceless and being invisible and being lonely and being disconnected and isolated. And a lot of times those kind of quieter emotions get overlooked. And so a lot of the people that find their way to me are people who feel like I feel. And so just by me being honest and being myself, when they engage with me, that's how I market myself. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've been told that I should not talk about rejection or feeling depressed or ADHD or all these other negative things because it tarnishes the writing. And my response is, no, this is real life. I'm crying on this Instagram story because I got rejected from a fellowship I really, really wanted. And it's important for me, for other people who are trying to be in this industry, to see that. And then that organically brings people to me, because I may have had multiple books and I may have gotten these particular things, but I'm still a writer struggling to be in a good solid footing and to be comfortable with her work. And so that's the way that I find my audience, is how I promote myself. And then because people are organically engaged with me when I do have something to promote, I do have a book to sell, I know those people are actively going to go out and support it because we have a connection outside of that promotion.
Anybody else want to hop on that one?
Well, I'm really bad at marketing. Like I wish that I was good at social media, but like, I'm not someone who has a take for every new story that comes out on Twitter. I haven't been able to do that. But I think that, like, how do you toot your own horn? I try to just keep working and doing things that, people like, I guess. And eventually you can factually say things like, you know, I've published in Time, like New York Times and The Atlantic and blah, blah, you know, and then you can just sort of say it factually. And I think that when I feel like I am, like Athena said, when I feel like I'm selling myself, it doesn't feel authentic. But when I have an authentic feeling of confidence in my own work, I think that comes across, and that's probably the thing to work on as a writer.
Audrey, would you like to hop on that one at all?
Yeah, I have to spend so much time reminding myself of what I've done that I too really struggle with like projecting that out. I will say that for all that, and I'm so sad to see where Twitter is going, because that really wound up being, especially as the pandemic happened, that's where I wound up building a lot of my writing community. And I have, strangely, thanks to that strange bird app, some lifelong friends that came out of that. But I never used it as a means to an end. I would tweet quippy things or weird things that were happening. And that it was always like a very short humor form. And so that started to build an audience, but it also meant that I was genuinely engaging with readers and with writers and joking about stuff, or, you know, swapping funny parenting moments and that kind of thing. And those are the people that, when I got my book deal, right, those are the people who are out there. They're the ones trumpeting it. They're the ones cheering you. You don't get a more loyal cadre of people than other writers, because they and it's not just because they want to see the same thing happen for them that's happened for you. It's because they genuinely are invested in seeing what happens to other writers who have joy in this wonderful, I'm not going to call it a profession, vocation, calling. And so I guess what I'm saying is I let them do it. Like, if I get a publication, if I land another humor piece or something, I share it on Twitter, I share it on Instagram, and I let it go, and I let it do whatever it's going to do. And I also, what I was saying about the moving the needle thing, this was the other thing that let me have a little bit of peace on this. I started subscribing to a site called Audrey that will actually do like your analytics, where I'm terrible at analytics, but it will analyze where the traffic for your work is really coming from.
Oh, interesting.
And all of the work that I was doing to promote things that I was writing, I was doing on Twitter, because that was my biggest audience. I had thousands of followers on Twitter. I wasn't doing anything on Facebook at all. And when I got the first analytics report back, I saw that I was getting like 4 or 5 shares on Twitter, and I was getting thousands on Facebook. I wasn't doing anything at all on Facebook. And that was the moment when I realized this has nothing to do with me. The work, once it's out there, it has its own track. And I'm not going to be able to do much with that. It has to stand on its own. And it's gone out into the world, and I'm very proud of it. And y'all let me know what you think.
Wow. Thank you, everybody, for those answers. So it seems, again, the theme, right? Like community, chasing what you love, and being authentic seems to kind of be where we've landed. As we wrap up here, does anybody want to say any last thing before we sign off?
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm so excited to meet. I haven't met a lot of writers in Richmond, strangely. I do a lot of interaction with folks from other areas, and so I'm always really excited to meet other writers in this area.
There's a lot of us here.
Yes, I know.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone on your work.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Athena, would you like to hop in here at the last moment?
Thank you very much. If anybody is in the Philadelphia area, please reach out to me. And if not, I'm very happy to talk to anyone about anything. You can find me on Instagram.
Thank you all for your honesty and sharing so much of yourselves with us tonight. I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just like Phil said, and Phil, thank you for doing such a wonderful job moderating and asking such great questions. And thank you to Sushma and Athena and Audrey for sharing and being honest and open about your responses. I did want to mention that, Caitlin, I didn't see your success. You said you have 2 short stories submitted to Lit magazines. Congratulations on that. I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that. But again, I want to thank our fabulous panelists and Phil for sharing with us this evening and giving your time, because I know you're all very busy. You're wearing very many hats already. So thank you so much. We hope to see you all again, and we hope to see our attendees again soon. We have a lot of great programming coming up, so please tune into something and plug in, and we hope to see you again soon. But have a wonderful evening, everyone, and take care and keep writing. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.